Okay, thank you. It is my pleasure to be here and talk about our work on this high-performance elliptic curve that we call 4Q, and with an extra focus on analysis of the analysis of this curve on high-performance applications or applications such as in IoT scenarios where you care about low power or low energy consumption. And following probably the vein that Michael Nerix mentioned, just to highlight how awesome ECC continued to be, and we will show a few reasons here in the presentation. So, but before going to the main part of the presentation, let me give some context about our work. Probably most of you are aware that there was a kind of competition to select new elliptic curves. The IETF finally selected through the CFRG two elliptic curves for standardization, Dan Bernstein curve 25519 and Mike Hamburg's Goldilocks curve. And there is already an RFC describing the curve, giving the generation details for the curve, and then focusing on cryptographic schemes, like in the case of this RFC. I show here, they show how to do DH key exchange for both curves. And then ongoing work is focusing on a signature scheme, and specifically they are targeting EDDSA. Now, in the CFRG discussion, there was a focus on what are the kind of requirements that should be important at the moment of selecting the curve, and this is a quote that I've taken from the NIST ECC workshop. The real motivation for working in CFRG is the better performance and side channel resistance of new curves developed by academic cryptographers over the last decade. So there was a real emphasis in performance and side channel resistance at the moment of selecting this curve. And I can add other requirements that were important at the moment of the selection. I mentioned two that I think are relevant: the rigidity in curve generation, and also the support for existing cryptographic algorithms such as ECTH, the ephemeral case especially, and signature schemes. So, given this context, with this motivation in mind, with Craig Costello, we kind of sit down and said, okay, how fast we can go with ECC, how we can design a curve that is really very efficient at the same time is secure. And so we began to put together the best of ECC at the moment, and we call what we came up with 4Q. And that really takes the best out of the literature. It combines in an optimal way, two endomorphisms. This has been work that began with the seminal work by Galland, Lambert, and Vanson, and continue until very recently by Ben Smith, Gilevik, and Ionica very recently. We also combine the use of the Edwards form with the efficient Edwards coordinates, and finally using the very compact Mersenne prime 2 to the 127 minus 1. Now, after assessing and implementing and assessing the security and performance of the curve, we actually observed that this curve really supported side channel secure implementations as we wanted, and also achieved top performance, another very important requirement. Another very nice feature of this curve is the uniqueness. This is actually the only curve at the 100 or close to the 128-bit security level with the properties that are shown above. So this unique gives a very special rigidity, let's say, characteristic to this curve. Now, let's focus for a moment on the performance side. What are we talking about here? It's we were analyzing on different kind of platforms the performance that we could achieve with 4Q. In this case, for example, I show the speed in thousands of cycles to compute the standard operation in ECC that is called variable-based scalar multiplication. And I show for different computer classes here the numbers that we obtain, for example, at an Intel desktop class and a smartphone class, such as an ARM Cortex A15 processor, and a microcontroller class like a Cortex M4 microcontroller. And you can see, compared with Curve 5.9, we observe a significant speed ratio well above 2x and even close to 3x in some cases. So when we, from some certain perspective, we can think of 4Q as the road runner of elliptic curves or something like that. So, so this is in terms of performance, and we were analyzing how the performance look in very different platforms. And so the next step was, well, let's look at the CFRG was doing, and they obviously focus on trying to make the course work on basic cryptographic schemes, specifically ECDH and signature schemes. And I'll focus in the, at some point in the presentation on those. First of all, let me first give you some basics about 4Q, what it is specifically. And this is a curve that is defined, by the way, on a quadratic extension field, where the characteristic is a large prime, where P is the Mersenne prime that I mentioned at the beginning. We have these specific parameters, and the most efficient representation of this curve is in the twisted Edward form, which is shown here. The cardinality of the group of points on this curve, it's actually 392 times a very large number, in this case a 246-bit prime. And so you can see that there is a cofactor that is, let's say, relatively large, and we have to deal with it. Other important facts, it supports the fastest addition laws in elliptic curves that are also complete. That means they allow very secure side-channel secure implementations. And importantly, it comes equipped with 2 endomorphisms. And just to give you a rough idea, an endomorphism can be thought as a shortcut when you compute the scalar multiplication that maps a point on the curve to other point, let's say in the middle or a quarter of the whole computation of a scalar multiplication. So it's like a shortcut to obtain values on the curve and save a number of point operations. So this curve has optimally 2 endomorphisms, and so what you can do with it is basically transform your original classical scalar multiplication, in this case expressed as m times p, to a multi-scalar multiplication with these mini-scalars a sub 1 to a sub 4. Now, we describe in the main paper that we published in Asia Crypt 2015 a decomposition method. It's optimal in the sense that you can input any scalar m that has 256 bits, and you decompose in exactly 4 mini-scalar a sub I with a maximum size of 64-bit each. So something like the following. Let's suppose we have a scalar m, and then with the decomposition method, you can obtain these 4 mini-scalars, which are 64 bits maximum. Now, each of the mini-scalars will be attached to either to the base point or to a value using the endomorphisms, mapped by using the endomorphisms. So let's take a look at how the scalar multiplication works in this case. Before proceeding, because we want to do it efficiently and in a side-channel resistant way, we have to recode the mini-scalars. So these are the values taken in binary form from the previous mini-scalars, and we perform 2 steps to convert them to the representation, the sign representation below. And if you notice, every column now is non-zero because the top row, all of them, all the values available here are now digits that are either 1 or -1. So if you look at them from a column perspective, you can construct these values, digits that are from 1 to 8, and accompanied by the sign in each case. And the sign is determined by the digits on the top row, that is the first mini-scalar. Now, using this representation after decomposing and recoding, you can proceed with the scalar multiplication. What you have to do first is construct a table and with 8 values, combining all the possible values of the base point plus the mappings of using the endomorphisms, the map values using the endomorphisms, and each entry will correspond to. So each digit will point to an entry in the table. So if you do the computation from left to right, first of all, you take the entry 6 and load it, and then you proceed to perform exactly 64 doublings, addition operations, or subtractions, depending on the sign, of course, each time doubling and performing an addition or subtraction with one value from the table. And the entry is indicated by the digit, of course. This is exactly 64 times, done 64 times. That means it's a very regular execution containing exactly 64 doublings, 64 additions, and that facilitates protection against timing and simple sidechain attacks. And also, the table only contains 8 points. Naively, it would contain 16. After recoding, we can make it more efficient, only 8 points in this case. Okay, so these are, let's say, a very quick overview about the kind of computation that we need for the high-speed version of the scalar multiplication using 4Q. And now, what about doing some basic stuff in the cryptographic sense? We recently wrote an internet draft in collaboration with Watson Ladd and Richard Barnes. And it's available in this link. The title of the draft is Curve for Q. The current version describes the compressed version of the cofactor ECDH, meaning that the public keys are compressed and they are 32 bytes in total in size. Inside the document, we describe 2 implementations of scalar multiplication. The one that I described, the high-speed version using endomorphisms, but also we describe a naive version without endomorphisms. That could be suitable for memory constraint applications, for example. Now, let's look at very roughly, this is the basic cofactor ECDH, but for completeness, let me go through it very quickly. In the case of this scheme, you have Alice and Bob that wants to communicate. They establish some secrets A and B and compute the scalar multiplication with a generator, and then they proceed to compress the values. That means that if you have a point on the curve that contains an XY coordinate, the compressed form is basically the Y coordinate by plus a sign bit that is derived from the X coordinate. You pass the value, you have to decompress it, you have to perform a validation to make sure that the value is on the curve. Now here is the cofactor part. You have to compute 392 times the validated value. And this computation consists of actually 8 doublings and 2 additions. And then the final computation to get to the supposedly shared secret. On the other side, you perform roughly the same operations, and hopefully you get to the same share value. Now, as I said, these are compressed public keys of 32 bytes long, and so that's similar, for example, of Curve to 5519. But you can also proceed with an uncompressed version where you use 64 bytes, and it's slightly faster and more power efficient, so it could be more suitable for certain applications. It's just a straightforward implementation of cofactor ECDH without the compression part. Now, the next part is that we wanted to do something about signatures, so we look at the we came up with a specification of a high-speed, high-security signature scheme, and we call it the Schnorr-Q, which is basically a Schnorr-type signature scheme closely following the EDDSA specification, but in this case using 4Q. So we apply some changes in some cases. As in the case of EDDSA, we have two versions. So one using pre-hashing, which is efficient to support single-pass interface for signing. During signing, you have to load the message twice at least, and that could be inefficient if the message, for example, is too long. So if you apply pre-hashing, that could make things more efficient in certain scenarios. Also, the version without pre-hashing, and in this case, we have the resilience against hash function collisions, of course, for the version without pre-hashing. Now, this is a Schnorr-type signature scheme, so you have a deterministic generation. You don't need randomness per signature, as, for example, is the case of ECDSA. And as in the case of EDDSA, we have small signatures, 64 bytes in size, and small public keys, 32 bytes in size. But the relevant feature here is that we have, at least to my knowledge, very efficient, probably the fastest core-based signature scheme at the 128-bit security level. And to show you the kind of performance that we achieve, for example, these are numbers for an Intel Haswell processor. Signing takes 39,000 cycles, compared against 61,000 cycles achieved by ET 25519. Verification is even much faster, 64,000 cycles compared to 185,000 cycles for ED 25519. So very high speed, which can be suitable for high-performance applications. And here's the link with the specifications for those of you that are curious about the complete details for the specification of a Schnorr-Q. Now, we are putting together these schemes, and we implemented them, and now we are preparing the release of version 3.0 of our library. The library that we wrote is called 4QLib. The current version is 2.0, but we are releasing version 3.0, including cofactor ECDH and Schnorr-Q digital signatures as I described them. 4QLib already includes a bunch of implementations, but the version 3.0 will include many more. And for example, we have a portable implementation, an x64 optimized implementation for 32-bit platforms, optimized implementation for ARM using Neon, and also for some 32-bit ARM microcontrollers, such as Cortex-M4. And all of the crypto operations in the library are protected against timing attacks, cache attacks, exception attacks, invalid curve attacks, and small group attacks. Now, for the next slide, let me focus on these implementations. We have been doing some work on small devices, embedded devices, such as 8-bit, 16-bit, and 32-bit microcontrollers, trying to assess what kind of performance and memory and energy constraints you can achieve with 4Q. So, and this is joint work, by the way, with Zeliu, Giovandro Pereira, and Wajon Zio. We basically ported and specialized the library to various microcontrollers. Here to show you a very quick summary of the kind of performance that we are achieving. These are preliminary results. I'm showing for an 8-bit AVR at Mega microcontroller, and also for a Cortex-M4. You can see, comparing against CUR25119, significant speed up in comparison with that curve. And I think we can still go farther in the case of AVR. I think this is still a lower bound. So now let's focus on the AVR implementation. We want to assess how much efficient also not only in terms of performance, but also in terms of energy consumption, which can be relevant for IoT applications that care a lot about latency, let's say, or a latency response, but also energy consumption. And here I have preliminary results showing the computation in seconds, for example, for 8-bit AVR microcontrollers for crypto operations. So I'm showing here for ECDH and also for signatures. Comparing, here the numbers are for NIST P256, which is shown in green, CUR25519, and ED25519 for in gray, and for Q, SCHNOR-Q in blue. And you can see in each case we achieve a much better performance. These are in terms of seconds on this 8-bit AVR microcontroller. These are more details about the implementation that are compared. Basically, one thing that I want to point out is that, for example, you can see here a very, very huge speed up in the case of key generation. That's because the state-of-the-art implementations of these other curves don't support fixed base scalar multiplication. So that shows how much improvement you can get if you exploit pre-computed tables, as we do. And in general, this also shows how 4Q is the only option that computes most of the stuff in less than 1 second. And that kind of latency can be important in some applications. So as you can see, only here in verification is slightly above, but all other cases is below 1 second. That can be an important factor in certain applications. Now let's look at more closely to the case of ECDH, static ECDH and ephemeral ECDH. Again, NIST P256 results in green, CUR25519 in gray, and 4Q in blue. By the way, the C means compressed public keys, and the U is the uncompressed version that I described in previous slides. Again, you can see the performance difference. These are estimated energy consumption in millijoules on the AVR, and this analysis corresponds to a wireless sensor node a popular wireless sensor node that is called MICA-Z at 7.37 megahertz. So again, you can see the significant improvement in terms of energy, significantly notorious in ephemeral ECDH, and that again, it's because most implementation of, let's say, CUR25519 don't exploit pre-computations for ECDH. So for truly ephemeral computations, our library performs much better. And that could be important for low energy applications. Now, our implementation, as I'm showing, it prioritizes speed and also a low power consumption. So there is a trade-off, of course. We have higher memory consumption, and this is shown as an example here. Our variable basis scalar multiplication requires almost twice the memory size for code compared with the CUR25519 implementation. So depending on the application, you can balance or decide on what is best. In the case that speed latency is important, or low energy is more important, then 4Q gives an edge, a very important edge. But you have to balance depending on the application. On the other hand, 4Q is very rich, it contains very rich arithmetic. So really, if your project is more important memory consumption, then you can even implement 4Q using a Montgomery ladder as CUR25519 and have a very constrained implementation and still be faster and more power efficient. So that's another advantage of 4Q, the kind of flexibility that you can get out of it. Now, let me finish this presentation, but showing our work in progress. We are working on plugging in 4Q into OpenSSL, and this is showing work with Bob Bramley and Nicola Tuveri. We have been working on this integration, working with the current version of 4QLib. Actually, that integration is complete. Version 2.0 works with version 1.1.0 of OpenSSL. So there is a wide support of any ECC protocol that is out there can right away use 4Q. And we will be releasing the patch for OpenSSL soon. Now, one downside of that approach of supporting all the protocols available is that we have to use some of the slow parts of OpenSSL, and in particular, it hurts to use some of the multi-precision operations, as I will show in the last two slides. Now, we have more work in progress to address these performance issues, because we plan to have an additional option using an external engine to provide 4Q that should solve most of the performance degradation issues. And also we are integrating SchnorrQ for signatures. Let me show you the preliminary results in OpenSSL, in this case on a 64-bit Intel Skylake processor, to show the kind of performance that we achieve when we compare against NIST P256, and CUR25519 against the 4Q implementation. Here we show the cases of static ECDH and also ECDSA, not for the case ECDSA, not for the case of CUR25519. As far as I know, this curve hasn't been plugged into ECDSA, so I cannot show numbers for that. In any case, you can see when you compare the performance of 4Q against the numbers of the other two curves, there is a significant improvement in the operations per second that are here, especially here, the green value that corresponds to ECDH. There is also a significant speed up in the case of ECDSA verification. And now, we don't observe that much of a speed up in the case of signing, and that is related to the OpenSSL performance issues. And that will be obvious in the next implementation. Now, I have a comment here. At least the implementation that we tested of CUR25519 in OpenSSL was kind of slow. Nicola Tuveri actually plugged in a new engine for that curve based on Donna C64, and that performed much better. Now, here is the breakout of the timings on the same Skylake processor, now focus on P256 and 4Q for ECDSA and ECDH. Here is to show what are the kind of operations that are causing performance issues. And as you can see, the numbers in blue that corresponds to the scalar multiplication pretty much makes sense. In every case, you see that 4Q is much faster, as it should be. But you can see these blocks in pink and orange. They are pretty expensive. And those corresponds to actually to modular inversions. And modular inversions shouldn't be that expensive, but in OpenSSL they are. So when we use their functions, we really get a hit here. And so that's one of the issues that we are solving with using the external engine and using our own functions. So we will see pretty soon most of the cost overhead in 4Q going away and getting a much better ratio in the improvement. So with this, I'm finishing. If anybody's interested in getting more additional information about our project related to 4Q, there is the paper out there, the link to the library, the RFC draft. There is a reference implementation in Python that comes together with the RFC draft, posted in GitHub, SchnorrQ, and so on, and all the stuff that is coming soon and will be released. If you want to be participant of this project, you can do a lot of stuff. There are a bunch of stuff that can be done. So talk to us, send us an email, and that's all that I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks for your talk. So early on, you showed the trick with the endomorphisms, and you had that table of 8 pre-computed points. Mm-hmm. So how did you protect that table of 8 against the cache timings?
Yeah, so as in all other ECC implementations, when you have multiple points that you have to access, you have to do it in a constant way. So basically you do a linear path through all the points and use logical operations to access each point and take the one that you want.
Interesting. So is that actually faster than, because the 8 points there are just sums of 3 different points together.
Yeah.
So is that actually faster than going through it is?
Yeah, it is much faster.
Great.
Yeah.
You mentioned you have a faster engine for modular inversion for OpenSSL. Why not just contribute it and not use the engine? Users don't really like using engines in OpenSSL. It's a pain. Is it possible to get that integrated?
Well, I'm not the best to answer that question. I don't know.
Are you going to make it available?
So the question is, yeah, we are going to make it available. So we are probably that wasn't, I passed too fast on that, but the release is coming soon for the patches to OpenSSL. So the idea is to publicly, openly.
All right, but
yeah.
Pull requests welcome if you have a faster modular inversion.
Okay.
We're on GitHub. Yeah.
Okay, great.
You provide some nice speedup as opposed to Curve to 5519. Ben Smith provided some nice speedup with the Kummer surface. Any comparison to this hyperelliptic curve?
Yeah. So if you go to the papers, you will see comparison with other curves available, including Genus 2 stuff like the Kummer. And in every case, except with a few exceptions, we see still a significant speed up in comparison with the Kummer. But Kummer is also an efficient alternative. Yeah.
Could I just ask about patents? I know the GLV method was patented, is patented. I'm not sure of my facts, but perhaps you could say, is there any patent issues that arise?
I cannot comment on patents. So the only thing that I can say, from our side, all our software is released under MIT license, open source, completely. So we are not planning to apply. We haven't applied for any patents on all the work that you see. If there are companies with patents, I cannot comment on that. What I will say is that our library supports both kind of implementations, exploiting endomorphisms and without endomorphisms. If there are any kind of concern, you still can use the case without endomorphisms, get a nice speed up, and that's an alternative that we also provide.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's thank Patrick again.